adore stories, and I will try to not make it you got it. These are probably my favorite words. Let me tell you a story. I am by nature and by profession, luckily, a storyteller. There are fancier words for it: correspondent, reporter, journalist. But at the end of the day, I'm just a storyteller. People come to me, they tell me their stories, I ask some questions, I try to fit it into the world as I understand it, and then I tell that story again, and I send it out. But that means that people tell me their story. And I never tell my story. So it feels a bit strange to be up here and telling you my story. But here goes. Let me tell you my story. It is the story of how I found and lost and found again my rebel yell. When I was a young girl, 9 years old, I ran wild in the countryside. I grew up in Sonoma County, part of California known as the Valley of the Moon, for you Jack London types out there. It was idyllic, it was magical. I was free to roam far beyond the acre we owned. Vast cattle grazing rangeland that surrounded our property. There was a creek that ran through our backyard, and I could follow it for miles. There was an abandoned quarry about a mile away that I got into some trouble going around. There were fields of mustard in spring. There were oak trees to climb in the summer. And while I was often alone, we lived far out of town, I was never lonely. There were really only two rules about me going out and doing this. I had to take the dogs, and I had to be home by dark. In my household growing up, we always had two dogs, two German shepherds, one young, one old, and constant rotation. When it was time for me to go out to play, I would call them to me with this Tarzan-like yell. It was loud, they would carry, and they would come, and they would roam with me off leash out in the countryside. And during the day, they were my companions. And at the end of the day, when it was time to go, I would call them to me again. Time to head home. It was, I realize now, my first rebel yell. Because what really is that? What is the rebel yell? I've been chewing on this since Lael asked me to speak. And I keep coming back to this central notion. It comes from a place of truth. It sounds true. It is something deep within us. That cry, that yell, that holler, it bursts out of you when you are overflowing with emotion. It might rise up like it did for me in joy, in exultation. It might be a call to arms. It might be a cry of defiance or anger. It is a statement and it is a demand to be heard. Looking back, that yell I had, it sums up all the power and confidence and wisdom I had that just poured out of me. I was never so strong as when I was 9 years old. And you probably were too. There's a special magic to young girls. I went to one of Lael's homecoming retreats, as several of you have, and she has these quotes and bits of borrowed wisdom tacked up all over. I took a picture of one and I thought about it all weekend, and it was a quote by Daniel LaFoot. And it read, "Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?" Let me say it one more time. Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be? I thought a lot about that idea that weekend and since. So it felt like I was coming full circle when she asked me to speak tonight on Rebel Yell. Because the first thing I thought of was that childhood yell. It was one of those strong memories, a touchstone, if you will, of my childhood, of who I was before the world told me who I should be. But like most girls, maybe even all girls, I was eventually asked to rein it in. I was asked to pipe down, to conform. I did. I was praised for it, even rewarded. And somehow without noticing, along with those, I started to learn to question my instincts. And I learned to bite my tongue. And the world sets us back. We all know that. It might be some shocking event that tears it away, or just the slow drip of culture, of advertising, of the world breaking in on us, and it just lands this pile of bullshit, who you should be, in the middle of your who you are. what is it about growing up that sets girls back? What pieces of the world get stuck in their shoe that slow their step, even make them stop entirely to sit down and worry about that stone in their shoe? Take off the stupid shoe. I want to tell them, throw it over your shoulder, run barefoot, past the stones the world puts in your way. It's the advice I would give to my own younger self if I could have. And when I think of what I was then and where I am now, I realize that my adult life has been shaped by these warring intentions of knowing who I am, of being told who I should be. In the arc of my adult life, I realized that crux has been about truth. It is about finding truth. It is about speaking truth. It is about recognizing truth. It is about naming truth. I saw it in my personal life. I have little patience for fluff. I'm not very good at small talk. I am the kind of person who has a handful of very close friends and not a huge circle of acquaintances. I'm happy to join in, but you'll find me at the edges of the crowd. In my professional life, I do the same. I'm a reporter by definition that thrusts me into this chaotic, daily existence. And I love that. I love that I have no idea when I show up in the morning what I'm going to be doing on any given day. But I'm going to have to get to the bottom of it. I'm going to have to understand it. I'm going to find its truth. The reporter laughs. And by the time the sun goes down, I'm going to tell that story. But it's not my story. It's never my story. So again, this idea that I even have a rebel yell is still something that I'm working on. And I hold it at arm's length. I know it's there. And that's where I got to where I told Lael that my rebel yell is that scratch of the pen on paper. It's the clicking of those computer keys. It's a quiet thing. But that is my call to arms, and that is my demand for your attention. That is the gathering of my tribe. But in the last few years, I found myself at an unexpected crossroads. This life I've carved out, this is an artistic life full of truth and beauty and friends. I love it. But it isn't satisfying me the way it once did. I worked so hard to get here, and while I may be comfortable, I am not satisfied. I can point to any number of things that might be to blame. I'm getting old. I'm distracted by the creaks in my body and in my pocketbook. I don't have time for myself the way I once did. My industry, in case you haven't heard about newspapers, it's in upheaval and not in a good way. I live far from my home and people that I love. But these are what I think of as the vagaries of middle age. Even as I bring them up one by one, I sort of dismiss them and I move past them. Partially, that's my nature. That's just the way life goes. But one thing has brought me up short and demanded that I act. Three things, to be specific. My children, my 9-year-old daughter, Kate, my 6-year-old daughter, Vivian, and my 3-year-old son, David. I know that I need to be my truest self for them. I cannot settle. But who is that person? What do I stand for? What is my truth? What is my rebel yell? Too often the woman they see is the hairy, fragile, questioning adult I've become. I realize that I want them to see that 9-year-old girl in me, the one who is so strong and so sure. I want them to trust their own instincts. I want them to roam their own countrysides. I want them to climb their own trees, even fall out of them. Sometimes my husband Frank and I joke that all we're really hoping for with our kids is that we just don't screw it up. And we laugh, but there is truth there. They're all right. We just have to not screw it up. So I've decided that the most daring thing that I can do, the most meaningful call I can make to call my children to me, is to keep that 9-year-old close to my heart, to keep her present. And I began this campaign in earnest 2 years ago. And I don't think it was a coincidence that it happened just as my oldest daughter was turning 7, out of that toddlerhood and into her own young girl. And she had questions, and she had her own thoughts, and I saw what was happening. At the time, I was at a low point, to be frank. I was trying like crazy to be everything to everyone. I was working long hours at a demanding job. I was never home for dinner. And when I was home, I was playing catch-up with the laundry and the vacuuming and all those chores I put off. I had no center of calm to give my husband, my children, my colleagues, and it goes without saying I have no time for myself. Like many women, I put myself first in line when it comes to responsibility and last in line when it comes to caretaking. It wasn't sustainable, I knew that. But everything in me resisted making a change for fear. Fear that I would be seen as a failure, that I needed help, that I couldn't do it anymore. I thought to admit these things would be to let everyone down. And as a working woman and as a manager in that place, I didn't want to be seen as backing off, particularly because I had children, particularly because I was a working mother. Even if I knew that it was going to work for me, I thought that it would set a bad example, and it would harm the next working mother that came along. I didn't want to give any ammunition to the naysayers. But then for the umpteenth time, I got home just after dinner, just in time to read some stories, sing some songs. I got my quality 10 minutes. It's not enough. And it was a poor substitute for me being more fully involved in my children's life the way I wanted to be for myself and what they deserve. So I jumped. I asked for God to move to a job with fewer responsibilities that gives me greater control of my hours. I'm home for dinner most nights now. I was at my 6-year-old's first t-ball game last night. I can make that afternoon play at the school. And while I'm doing this, while I am sweating this out, with many of you, frankly, thinking about this, I was making this incredibly difficult decision in the wonderful chaos of a job that I do love. That damn sure and I embrace it and I despise it at the same time. It is aggravating as hell. I hear her, but it's not for everyone. And that is where the rebel in me comes out. I know that I am doing the right thing. I know that. I can feel the truth of that in the very core of my being. And when I have any doubt, I go to the room where my daughters sleep. And I pull down this picture. And it sits on a shelf in their room. It was sent to me a few years back. Somebody was cleaning out the garage or something in my childhood home. And it's a picture of me. I'm a young girl. And if you can't quite see it, I'm hanging one-armed, Alvin style, out of a tree. I've got a huge grin on my face. It's everything I think of when I think of my childhood. But I don't look at this side of the picture. I put this in that room a few years ago, and I didn't know that my oldest daughter, Katie, when she was about 7, where the story began, she wrote something on the back. So here in the back, in her scrawl, barely able to write, this is Mom. So maybe they see me for who I am after